Well, Chris, what's going on in the world of launches and space and what's happening up there?
We've actually got something that kind of relates to what he was just talking about there with things that we don't know how it's going to work out. I've got some suspense to offer here. We've got a launch coming up that I really want you to look at. On Out to Launch This Day, I want you to cast your mind back. This is something maybe you've forgotten about. In the distant past, by which, of course, I mean a year and a half ago. That seems like a million years ago. But a launch happened of a spacecraft that was designed to carry people, which didn't go as well as we'd hoped. Now, we've talked a lot about the Dragon spacecraft, which is made by SpaceX, Space Exploration Technologies, a new startup company. As a matter of fact, a lot of old timers like me were not at all sure about SpaceX launching people, but they're doing it now reliably. It was the older companies that have been around for a long time we thought were the ones who were going to show SpaceX how it was done. And Boeing leads the list. Boeing had a launch of their Starliner designed spacecraft, and they did that in December 2019. And surprising a lot of folks, it did not go exactly as we had hoped. During the launch, the rocket was fine. The Atlas V launch vehicle performed fine. But when the spacecraft separated and was intended to fire its own rockets and get up into a higher orbit where it could rendezvous with the space station, again, nobody on board. This is just a test of the vehicle. Well, it didn't fire its rocket engines properly. As a matter of fact, it started firing steering rockets incorrectly and doing all kinds of other things, using up fuel, while mission control frantically tried to send commands to tell it, knock it off. This is not the right time to do that. It turns out they found out the computer on board, its internal clock was off 11 hours. It had been set wrong, so the spacecraft didn't know when it was, even if it knew where it was. So with all that fuel having been spent, Starliner couldn't meet the space station. It was in orbit, but it couldn't meet the space station. And you can think of the analogy like this. It's like diverging paths. If you realize your mistake right away and you've taken the wrong path, you can just step a couple of feet and you're on the right path. But if you go farther down there, you're 100 feet down the path. By the time you realize your mistake, you've got to go tromping through the brush to find the other path. And what if you go miles down the wrong path? Well, that's the analogy here, because the spacecraft had gone far enough from being able to get into that orbit, it would have taken too much fuel. So they're in orbit, but not the right orbit. This is very embarrassing, but at least the spacecraft was up there. But there was another problem that had gone on at the same time, which I told you folks that mission control was frantically trying to tell the spacecraft to knock it off. Well, they couldn't get through. They were having trouble getting commands up to the spacecraft. And the reason for that is that the communication system was being interfered with, among other things, by cell phone traffic on the Earth. The system had been designed in such a way that it was glitching out so that the problem got out of hand. One of the things, by the way, astronauts are very proud of is being able to fix things. Astronauts who are intending to fly on this vehicle later were very quick to point out that if they'd been sitting in the seat, instead of it being an automated flight, they would have flipped a couple switches and fixed it in a few seconds. But the communication system, no matter what, would still have to get fixed. There was another problem. They decided to bring the vehicle home after 2 days. Well, at that time, the bottom part of the spacecraft, the service module that generates power and has rocket engines on it, would separate and get away from the spacecraft that comes back. That's the crew module on top. Well, fortunately, Boeing's engineers double-checked all the computer code and instructions while in orbit and found out there was an error in the commands for this, and the crew module could have been hit by the service module after it separated. That's the kind of accident that could actually cause the loss of the crew if there'd been people on board. So another very serious problem. Now, the landing past that went okay. First parachutes and then airbags. This lands on land, by the way, unlike the Dragon, and it made it back. But there was a long laundry list of things that needed to be fixed by Boeing from a very unhappy NASA. A list of about 80 things with NASA inspectors right over their shoulder. Those things have been done, and they built a number of spacecraft. They built another one, and they're going to test it again with no people. This is a very important test, and it's about to happen on July 30th. July 30th, it's a Friday at 11:53 a.m. Nice convenient time for us. Day launch from Cape Canaveral. They're going to try again. Now, I mentioned this was kind of surprising that there'd been a problem in the first occasion. I'm assuming it's going to work out fine, but it's going to be an exciting thing to watch. Now, I said this was one of the old tried and true tested companies. Boeing, through mergers over the years, has taken into it what used to be at the top there, North American Aviation. That's one of the old great airplane manufacturers. They made the P-51 Mustang fighter in World War II. They were founded in 1928. They also built the X-15 rocket plane that took people to the edge of space in the early 60s. Then they merged North American Aviation with North American Rockwell. They merged with Rockwell, became North American Rockwell. Those are the guys that, well, my dad worked there at the time and built the Apollo command module. Talk about glory days. And then when they became just Rockwell, and I worked there, we built the space shuttles. Again, talk about a company that's done the big heavy lifting. Well, in the end, Rockwell their space division was merged into Boeing. So these are those same people. The grandpappy for Starliner is Apollo. It's really startling, but it's kind of their old school a little bit in the way they do things. Look at the spacesuits. On the right there, you've got the SpaceX spacesuit. And boy, does that look like a Silicon Valley startup sort of thing. Sleek, gleaming black and white thing, nary a pocket. I mean, it's amazing looking. The Boeing spacesuit is on the left. Now, it works fine. It's a good design, but there are zippers and knobs and tubes and everything. It's Grandpa's spacesuit. It works perfectly fine, but it's a conservative design. The same on the inside of the vehicles. If you look at the inside of the vehicles, the Boeing spacecraft has switches. They have joysticks to fly things. There are television screens, but this is no touch screen rich environment. It's not what they call a glass cockpit. It's a cockpit, like Neil Armstrong would recognize. And I like these things, but it's a different style. And compared to, for example, this is a picture inside the Dragon spacecraft. They have those touch screens. Now they have a few buttons under the touch screens, but the automatic systems, well, they worry me a little bit. I'm kind of rooting for the old-fashioned Starliner. I want to see it work, but no matter what, it's important that it does because there's a crew waiting. These people have been training with the Starliner, and if this test goes well, in December or so, Starliner is going to have these 3 astronauts on board. So, fingers crossed, July 30th, we should watch this one. It'll be exciting. Now, next month in All Space Considered, talking about a launch, we know how it works out, and boy, did it work out great. Apollo 15 may be the most scientifically important of the Apollo missions at an incredible landing site, the first mission to bring the lunar rover and conduct all kinds of experiments. We'll be talking about it next month, and in the meantime then, July 30th, watch your TV, and we'll be talking next month about that and Apollo 15. Thank you, Dr. Reitzel, and back to you.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm kind of with you. The glass cockpit's super pretty, glorious. Love it for video games, love it for touchscreens, that sort of stuff. But I don't know. I was making a joke in one of our meetings, like the intern decides for the zero gravity detector, they put in a plushie or a stuffed animal. Well, maybe the new guy thinks it's funny to put a bowling ball in there that's painted like Earth instead of the Earth plushie. That thing goes bouncing around off all, it hits those glass panels, you're done. Although at least they did put in a return switch into that thing. So there's a physical button that'll take them back to Earth if everything else breaks, I heard.
That is true. And I do want to point out that originally the first proposals for SpaceX were for the vehicle to be entirely glass cockpit touchscreens because it looks so nice. And then they got some NASA astronauts and sat down and said, I want a joystick and I want some physical controls. So they do have some.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a little concerned. Hey, look at me. I'm dignified, gray-haired elder statesman of space travel. But let's see how Grandpa's spaceship does. I think it's going to be good.
I think it'll do better on this next flight.